nomadcapitalist.com. This is the Nomad Capitalist Report. We have been speaking for some time, writing as well on our website, about the United States and the many laws and the many attempts the United States has made over the years at shutting down various sovereign government programs, as well as extending its reach across the world. Now, my next guest is going to explain what, in his opinion, is one of the most unknown yet most draconian laws ever to be added to a bill, let alone that a job creation bill. That's, after all, how the Congress in the United States does things. The law is FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. James Jatras is the editor of RepealFATCA.com, and he is speaking about exactly the effects of this new law. James, welcome, and thank you for joining me. Let's get into exactly how this is set up. It requires Americans not any longer just to disclose on FBARs and 1040 forms all of their tax forms, foreign accounts, but now takes the extra step of mandating that foreign governments, foreign financial institutions within those sovereign countries do the dirty work for the IRS. Explain this to our listeners, and also explain, I'd like to kind of touch on, as the interview goes on, people who aren't in the United States, what they might have to fear from this as well.
Absolutely, Andrew, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and with your audience. By the way, in addition to what we're going to talk about with institutions and governments, FATCA also adds another dollop of responsibility on individual Americans, in addition to what they have with FBAR. There's yet another form specific to FATCA, which is already required of Americans with foreign accounts that qualify under the law, starting with their 2011 tax return. So even though the major regulations on foreign institutions have not yet gone into effect, those affecting individual Americans already have. So this is just one more. It is a far more complicated disclosure form than FBAR is. So just one more straw on the camel's back. What FATCA does basically is simple in concept and absurd when you think about it. What it does is it requires every foreign financial institution in the world, every non-U.S. institution, whether it's a bank, a credit union, a pension fund, an insurance company, a stock or investment fund, a mutual fund, anything that can hold a deposit. Even charities are having problems with this law. To make an agreement directly with the IRS, the American IRS, to provide information about American accounts. And if they refuse to do that or even decline to do that, they are hit with a 30% penalty on any income they derive from the United States. Now, the idea here evidently is that if you force all these institutions to do this, that somewhere, somehow, all of the American tax evaders will fall out of the woodwork somewhere, even though what you're really doing is requiring people and institutions who have done nothing wrong or not hiding any tax revenue to undertake a very invasive and very expensive set of responsibilities. And we're talking about very great expense. A major bank, for example, the Wall Street Journal identified Toronto Dominion will spend itself $100 million complying with this law.
TD Bank.
Some of the tax, yes, and some of the tax lawyers I've talked to say that the aggregate for compliance worldwide could reach $1 trillion, and that's not even counting penalties, the 30% for non-compliance with the law. These are all costs that would be borne by these institutions, and then, of course, passed on to their consumers.
People in the United States have followed this, the recent presidential election. People across the world do that as well. Mitt Romney, who at one point had accounts in Switzerland and various places, was criticized for doing so, saying one would only be betting against the dollar or hiding money. Of course, one might also have a Swiss bank account living in Switzerland, but certainly the attitude in the United States, people travel less frequently, is that one has an account in these overseas accounts. It seems that the culture plays a big role in this, especially here in the United States. Is that not true?
Sure, I think that's part of it, and I think that's maybe one reason why when Congress passed this to the extent to which they thought of it at all, which was not very great, they figure, well, it's not a big deal. that most Americans don't have accounts overseas, and if you did, you're probably up to no good anyway. So why not do something like this? But again, the burden is not being put on anybody who's necessarily doing anything wrong. It's all of these. Think how people would feel in this country if we're sitting around minding our own business, and then they're told that France or Zimbabwe passed a law requiring you to do something here in the United States, and if you don't do it, some kind of penalty will be applied. We would say, well, that's absurd. What kind of authority do they have to pass a law that governs us here in our own country? Well, that's what we're doing with the rest of the world.
You have spoken on your website, repealfatca.com, about some of the implications this would have. Certainly, what is it that you found in your digging? And it's a very thorough reporting that you've done on this law, the FATCA. What is it that you have found that you believe the implications will be of FATCA in terms of investment in the United States? And certainly, I think that many Americans would say there's very few places to go. The U.S. holds all the cards. What have you found?
Well, a couple of things. There are two ways in which foreign institutions are dealing with this. One is to simply dump their American clients, which, by the way, won't do them much good. Even if they tell the IRS, well, we have a policy of not accepting American clients, the IRS is responsible. Prove it. What best practices have you put in place to ensure that none of your accounts are with U.S. persons? So that won't do them much good. The other obvious thing is for them to yank money out of the United States. Instead of investing in the United States, where that money, in a sense, would be hostage to a 30% withholding if the IRS was not happy with their FATCA performance, they'll say, forget that. We're going to put it to India or China or Russia. The BRICS are a pretty good bet these days. Why put it in the United States and run that risk? So I think we'll have that. The other thing is that even some of the proponents of FATCA admit that it's simply not enforceable. There's simply no way the IRS can enforce this kind of worldwide regime unless they can somehow bully foreign governments into acting as IRS's deputies. And that's what we have behind these so-called intergovernmental agreements, what they call IGAs. The first one, which was signed with the United Kingdom, where the foreign government says essentially, well, look, we're going to try to streamline this process as follows. We, London, will undertake to impose FATCA reporting requirements on our own domestic institutions and collect that money here in the United Kingdom and then share that with the IRS. And in exchange, you, the U.S. government, will require American banks, credit unions, pension funds, insurance companies, etc., to collect FATCA-like information from domestic American institutions and then share that with London.
If Americans who have retaliated greatly against things like $5 debit fees, I don't think they've seen just the beginning of it. Tell me, though, is the U.S.'s ability, you said bully, we'll use that word, do you feel that that's diminishing as the BRIC nations, as these other nations become stronger? In what you've researched, have you found that there are some countries, China comes to mind, for example, who just say, we're flat out not doing this, and you can't do anything about it?
China is the one that has come closest to saying that. They've taken the position not only based on sovereignty, which I think is commendable in principle, but also a legal argument, which is that because most of their institutions have some element of state ownership, they say, well, these are sovereign entities which do not come under FATCA. Now, this is the argument the American side does not accept. But nonetheless, it's pretty clear the Chinese are not going to go along with this, and I would say India, Russia, and Brazil are extremely iffy. So right away, you've already got a huge compliance problem with the U.S. trying to force the more compliant countries to knuckle under. So I think the whole thing is a big question mark. The real problem is how many foreign institutions have convinced themselves that this thing is inevitable and are clamoring to their governments to sign these completely counterproductive agreements with the U.S. It reminds me of what Otto von Bismarck said about preemptive war, that it's like committing suicide out of fear of death.
What is the fear? I'd like to get into this here as we continue. discuss the United Kingdom, discuss these other international agreements with foreign governments. And as well, certainly the United Kingdom is one of the top on the list of places where we have people who follow us and people who want to who have the same concerns that Americans do. Is the United Kingdom next to impose this type of law on their own citizens, or other countries next? Kind of highlight sort of the people who are on the United States' side of the fence versus those who are not.
What's happening with these ideas is as follows. Let's suppose you're a British bank or a mutual fund, and you say, oh, my goodness, I'm going to have to spend $50 million to comply with this American law and then make an agreement directly with the IRS to supply them information. For one thing, I can't do it because doing that would be violating British law, so I can't comply with it anyway. And then the Americans are going to take 30% of my revenue coming from the United States. What do? Well, they go to their government, and they go to London. They say, listen, go talk to the Americans and fix this. So London talks to the Americans, and they say, okay, let's make an agreement. We will collect this information from our institutions. We will pass laws here in the United Kingdom making it legal to transfer this information that you're demanding from our institutions to the tax collection agency in London, and then that agency will transmit the data to the United States, and you, the United States, will undertake to collect similar information on British residents in American institutions and send that to London. That's essentially what the deal is. Now, it's a completely one-sided deal in many respects. The cost of compliance can be far higher for the British side than for the American side, but even what the Americans what we're spending here doesn't do any good for the United States. It doesn't put any more money in the Treasury. All it does is help create a worldwide exchange of information, and now already we see the Parliament in the United Kingdom saying, well, gee, maybe we should pass a similar law. Let's start with one that applies to the Isle of Man and Guernsey and Jersey and see if we can expand that further. So I think you will start to see some copycat from other countries if FATCA is successful, but as I say, I think that's still an open question.
It is fascinating, if not as much frightening. James Stratris, my guest, the website repealfatca.com. We continue. I'm Andrew Henderson. This is the Nomad Capitalist Report.